Hello guys, and welcome to another video. Today I will be taking a look at the Canon 550D. It's also called the T2i and KISS 4 or something in Japan, I think. Now the reason why I wanted to make a video about this camera for my channel is that, in my opinion, this is the best deal. This is the best bang for your buck, especially if you're doing content creation, if you're making videos, but also with still photography. It can do a lot. It's a really good little camera, and it's extremely cheap on the used market. I got this one for the equivalent of 75 bucks used, and apparently it's barely even used. It looks almost brand new. It has a couple of scratches on the screen, but it's in really good condition. I haven't used it that much because I bought it just for this video, but so far I think this was a really good purchase. And the lens on this one, I'm not going to be going into that in depth in this video, but it's a Helios 58mm, I think, f2.0. It's a lens that I bought several years ago. It's an M42 mount. You can get cheap conversions, adapters to fit it onto the Canon EOS systems. Doesn't work with autofocus, but they're really good, especially for video. It's only manual focus, but it's nice and smooth. This one has quite a bit of fungus because I haven't been taking proper care of it. But anyways, let's get into the details of what we're going to talk about. This camera was launched in 2010, so it's starting to become a few years ago, but still it contains a lot of modern features. It has 18 megapixels. That is way more than you'll ever need, trust me. You'll never need more than 18 megapixels unless you have really specific needs, and then you won't be looking at this camera. For casual use and hobby photographers, whatever, 18 megapixels is a lot more than you'll ever need. It has full HD video. You can record 1080p at 24 and 25 frames per second. It does not have 1080p in 60 frames per second. In my opinion, that doesn't really matter for most video purposes. I've never used 60 frames per second in my video, and nobody has ever complained about that. It has I would say a below average autofocus system. It has I think it's 9 AF points. One of them, only the center is cross type, I think, and I'm not that much into the technical details. I'm more into how well does it actually work. And the autofocus points are quite centered in the middle, so composing images where your focus point is outside of the middle can be challenging if you're shooting wide open shallow depth of field lenses. The center point tracks quite well, but I've tried to use this camera when taking photos of my dog running around, and it will miss 90% of the shots. So this is not a camera for you if you're doing wildlife photography or sports or whatever that requires good autofocus. So just keep that in mind. The image quality, like I've said in my previous video, and I'm going to say in all my future videos, is that the image quality on a modern day DSLR is also, just like with the megapixels, way better than you'll ever need. You can never blame the image quality of a camera body for the fact that your images look bad. I'm going to make videos on the Canon 10D, 20D, even the old D2000, and you're going to see that the image quality hasn't really improved anything. Of course, ISO performance has improved, and other things like autofocus have improved, but the actual image quality, the rendering of the colors, as long as there's a CMOS sensor, the 1D Classic with the CCD sensor renders quite different colors. Some people actually like them better, but most of these new modern day DSLR cameras, they have the same image quality. When people talk about, oh, this camera has this amazing 3D effect on the photos and so on, It has nothing to do with image quality. That has more to do with people using full frame cameras for the first time and actually experiencing shallow depth of field and so on. So the image quality, 10 out of 10. It's incredible. The limiting factors are your photography skills and your lighting. If you have great lighting, you can make great, awesome, professional looking shots with this camera, and nobody will ever notice that it's a cheap camera. It has 14 bits of color. Again, that's something that has been proved on and on again, that it doesn't really matter. You can just Google tests of 14 bits versus the older, what is it, like 10 bit or 12 bit or 11 bit something. It has extremely minor differences, so don't care about the 14 bits. It has an ISO that goes up to 6400 and can be expanded to 12800. I would say that this camera is usable at up to 3200. After that it kind of falls apart. But again, if you have good lighting, especially if you're doing video where you have available lighting like I do here, it doesn't really matter. I'm shooting this at ISO 400 on a 650D, but that has pretty much identical ISO performance. So let's talk about actually using the camera. It has the old type of dial on top. It doesn't have a separate video mode on the on and off switch. To access the video mode, you have to press this video button. This message will appear when you're connecting old lenses like this, because it doesn't recognize the lens. And apparently I have no card in the camera, so I'm not going to shoot anything. But it's a nice handling little camera for video and for photography. The buttons are they all feel nice to depress, and video mode has zooming. You can zoom in using this zoom in button right here, and I don't really have anything to complain about using this camera. Even I mostly use AV mode when I'm photographing, when I'm shooting stills, and of course now I have no card in the camera. But changing the aperture and shutter speeds and so on is quite a pleasant experience. You use this wheel and you use these buttons to modify what the wheel does. And you have the menu and display buttons here, and your preview and delete. And there's no wheel, no squiggly turny wheel, and I've never really missed that. Especially on this camera, where you don't do sports and wildlife, where you're scrolling through lots of images and stuff. The shutter button, yeah, of course it doesn't work now when I don't have a card in it, but it sounds kind of cheap when you take photos. But that's not something you should consider or think about. The camera is light, really lightweight. Some people may think that it's a little bit too light, and it can get front heavy when you have heavy lenses on it, but it's not such a big problem. The viewfinder is not the best. It's small, it's really small looking through it. So if you're used to full frame cameras like the 5D and stuff, the viewfinder is night and day. It's this viewfinder is really bad in comparison, but that has a lot to do with the 1.6 crop factor. If you don't know what the 1.6 crop factor is, Google it. Let me see what else we're going to talk about. One thing that you can do with this camera, or you should do if you're producing video content stuff, is you should try out the Magic Lantern firmware. With that you can get higher bit rates, you can get focus assist stuff, and just in general get better video quality out of this camera with some free software that does no damage to your camera at all. The only thing I experienced when I used Magic Lantern on a 550D was that it drained my batteries. Even though I turned off the camera, it continued to drain the battery. So I ended up not using Magic Lantern. But it's maybe they fixed it now. That was a few years ago, so hopefully they have. It's a really powerful camera if you make videos and you use Magic Lantern. I highly recommend trying it out. So that pretty much sums it up. For 75 bucks, this is an insanely good deal. If you're making video, you can buy 2 or 3 or 4 of these, and you can do multi-camera shots really cheaply, buy cheap lenses like this, or just a Canon 50mm or something, and you can get some really decent budget setups where you can make some good videos without paying a lot of money. When buying a memory card, make sure you buy at least a class 10 SD card, because if you buy anything slower, you'll struggle with recording video, as the buffer will fill up and your videos will be interrupted. So if you have any questions about this camera, just post them in the comments below. If you have any requests on what camera you think I should do next, feel free to let me know, and I will see if I can find a used deal. And the conclusion of this video is that even in 2017, this camera is still just as good as it was new. It's an incredible deal for filmmakers. It's good enough for hobby photography if you're just getting into digital photography. But it's for video that it really shines, and it holds its own even in 2017. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.